Welcome everyone to today's session, in which I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak with David Clark, who is Head of Sustainability at Amcor. I'm delighted, first of all, because from past experience, I can say that David is a really fascinating thinker in the field of sustainability and packaging. But also this is a particularly opportune moment to catch up with Amcor. A few days ago, Amcor's 2021 sustainability report was published. And along with that, there was some associated research into consumer attitudes to sustainability and packaging. And it would be really interesting to hear about that. So David, welcome.
Thanks, Tim. Hello, everyone.
So maybe as a start, could you perhaps introduce yourself to the audience and let us know what your role is and what it entails across Amcor?
Yeah, sure. For those of you who may not be familiar with Amcor, we are a manufacturer of packaging for consumer goods. So packaging for food, beverages, home and personal care products, medical and pharmaceutical products. Primarily, we work with plastic, both flexible and rigid packaging, but also paper packaging, metals, and some other materials. As the head of sustainability, I'm the person who tries to develop the sustainability strategy for the business, and that covers everything from how we operate our own plants with efficiency, measuring and reporting on greenhouse gas emissions reductions, waste reduction, water use, but then also working with our supply chain on not only supply chain ethics and the things that you would expect, but also securing more sustainable products like more recycled content, bio-based materials. I work with our R&D team on developing more sustainable products. So big focus right now is on recyclability and changing over our portfolio to be more recyclable, but also lowering carbon footprint, and then also working with outside groups on how to increase recycling collection and move toward a circular economy for packaging. So I sit at the corporate level and then try to work with all of the individual Amcor business units and country level units to implement that strategy across Amcor.
Thank you very much. So, as I said, the 2021 sustainability report has just been published, and this is a kind of yardstick for the progress that Amcor has made annually against its key sustainability objectives. Maybe you could start off by just giving us a headline view of what this sustainability report contains and what kind of progress you have made over the last year.
Well, we're making good progress across a wide range of areas, and I think one of the key messages that we want to make sure people understand is that, number one, we're seeing change and we're picking up momentum, and it's not just Amcor, but it's across the industry. And I recognize some of the names of people who've joined this call as people that we're working with, and we'll recognize this and have been part of that overall success. So when we talk about product innovation, we've almost doubled the amount of recycled content that we've used in our packaging in the last 2 years. The percentage of our portfolio that's moving toward being 100% recyclable is increasing every year. Our folding carton business, we're at virtually 100% now. Within our rigid packaging, we're at over 96% is considered recyclable. And within the flexible packaging portfolio that we have, we're continuing to increase the amount of materials or packaging products that we make that are designed to be recyclable or fit recyclability standards. And now over 75% of our product portfolio is recyclable in terms of there is a recyclable option that our customers can choose in that category. So we've made some really good progress there. When it comes to collaborating with others, obviously we're working with suppliers to supply more sustainable raw materials, but then also working with outside groups like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, to create those circular solutions that need to be put into place to make sure that the packaging that we make can actually be collected and recycled. And then we also work to inform both the industry and consumers about the direction that we're going, the fact that we need to be working together on these sorts of standards and harmonization to solve the problems of plastic waste, and then working with consumers, because we can design products that are very recyclable or have suitable end-of-life scenarios. We need to make sure the infrastructure is in place, but we also need to make sure that consumers are able to engage with those systems. And you mentioned some survey work that we've done at the beginning. That was really about better understanding where consumers are today and then helping to inform the actions that we all take going forward.
Great, thank you. And let's pick up on that. So I understand that you've conducted quite an extensive global survey of consumer attitudes towards sustainability and packaging. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you were looking to find out in designing the survey, and what are the key findings that you've got from it?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, the way we see the solution is the packaging has to be recyclable. Then we need the infrastructure and we need consumer participation, and trying to understand where consumers are today in terms of participation and what they would like to see, so that we can move toward that was the ultimate goal. The survey was designed to focus on consumers in 6 different countries and try to get a range of both geographies and sort of the state of economies and recycling systems today. So we surveyed people in the UK and Germany, in the United States and Brazil, and then also in Australia and China, and asked them a variety of questions about how do you recycle today, what would you like to see, and what do you think about some of these ideas that we were proposing.
Okay, and what were the answers that they gave you?
Yeah, the real strong answers and the takeaways that I thought were really important is 76% of respondents across all of the countries say they would like to be able to recycle more. Recycling was clearly the sort of end of life scenario of choice for most consumers. When we gave them an array of options for what are the most important sustainability aspects or attributes in a package, recyclability was number 1. Clear instructions about recycling were number 2, and then recycled content was number 3. And further down the list were options like I think we should have reusable packaging, or I want packaging that I know will stay out of the environment if it's littered. So recyclability is really front and center for consumers. They want to be able to do more. And the other thing I think was really interesting was we asked consumers, well, what happens if you have a package that you know is recyclable, but you're not able to recycle it? And over 50% of consumers said they either feel frustrated or they feel sad. So obviously, if we give them more packaging that's recyclable, but they're not able to recycle it, we're creating another problem that we're going to need to resolve in the long run.
I'm curious whether, obviously it wasn't one of the highlights or one of the top answers, but did consumers talk about carbon emissions, carbon footprints of packaging?
It really wasn't an attribute that we were looking for in this survey. We were really looking at how do we move the packaging models that people have today, which are still very much linear, into circular models. And I think one of the reasons we didn't ask that question is in many cases, it's not a trade-off. As we design packaging that is more recyclable, in many cases, it also has a lower footprint in terms of carbon. We're removing the materials that are not only difficult to recycle, but materials that have a higher carbon footprint, like metal foils, or removing PET from a polyolefin package, and that lowers the carbon footprint at the same time. And then obviously, if we're recycling rather than landfilling and making new material, in many cases, it will have a lower footprint, and using recycled content does. So we didn't really dig into that with consumers as much as we were really focusing on, when you finish the product and you're holding the package, what's the interface that we need to make sure that we're successful.
Okay, thank you. I'm really curious as to whether there were any geographical splits, any trends that you could draw from this, being perhaps Eurocentric. Here in Europe, we tend to think that maybe European consumers are a little bit more environmentally conscious than everywhere else, but perhaps you're going to disabuse me of that idea.
Well, I think one of the things that we learned, there were some differences that we still have to unpack, so I don't want to draw conclusions, but I think attitudes within countries are all relative. And, for example, we asked a question along the lines of, would you like to be able to recycle more? And the respondents in Germany had actually a lower response than others. But if we look at that, we said, well, they're probably recycling a lot already. So they don't feel the need to be able to recycle more as much as people in some other countries. So understanding the context and how they answered would be important. one of the things that we did find when we were asking people about their level of frustration with current recycling, how confident are you that the packages that you put into the recycling bin are the right ones, or how confident are you that those materials are actually being recycled? Some of the lower scores came from the UK and the US. And the theory, at least at this point, it's not a conclusion, is because those are countries where the local councils design the recycling systems and they're different everywhere. There isn't a harmonized approach, and that's causing confusion with consumers. So still a theory at this point rather than a real finding from the survey. But those are I think the opportunities for us to unpack more as we go further with this.
Well, as you say, it's a theory, but as a UK-based consumer, as well as someone who talks about packaging, that does kind of ring true. It's definitely very fragmented where I'm sitting. Thank you, David. So I'd like to dig a little bit more into the detail of Amcor's strategies and actions that are addressing this apparently global consumer demand for recyclability. And well, first of all, I'm struck by the complexity of the various demands that are placed on packaging performance, and also you have the complexity of serving different supply chains across different geographies that have different characteristics and different waste management infrastructures. How does your global strategy with fairly kind of clear-cut headline objectives and goals take into account these kinds of nuances?
I think at the beginning, or the sort of the fundamental level, the role of packaging is obviously to protect the products that are going into it. And this industry, and again, many of you who are on this call now have participated in developing packaging that is incredibly efficient, that does a wonderful job of protecting products, reducing food waste, and protecting consumers while informing them about how to use the products in ways that they can enjoy. So the packaging industry, I think, should be very pleased with what we've done. One of the things that we didn't do is design packaging for specific end-of-life scenarios for many, many years. And this is really a trend that's just started in the last few years. And that's when I talked about the progress that we're making collectively. I think that, that comes through in our sustainability report, and we see it in other places. So it's very nice to see. There are some geographical differences today, certainly in collection and recycling systems. But I think one of the things that we're trying to overcome is that variation and come up with standardization through projects like the global commitment to end plastic waste, where companies have committed that by 2025 all of their packaging will be recyclable or reusable or compostable. That's sending strong signals to the market that in the future you will be getting materials that are going to be recyclable. We're trying to prove the economics of recycling, and then you have at the same time some initiatives to extend producer responsibility, or extended producer responsibility, and implement it in countries where it may not exist, to provide the regulatory framework and funding that's necessary for recycling. So I think all of those come together in a strategy that's not necessarily Amcor's strategy, but it's what we see as one of the best opportunities for our market to transition from linear to circular and solve the problems of plastic waste.
Thank you. And when we think about Amcor's specific targets, 2025 targets, obviously it's pretty close now. And you said, I think you're around 75% of your flexibles portfolio is already converted to design for recycling. Do you have a sense that that's on track or ahead of track? How is that in terms of your expected progress?
We are on track, and if you were interviewing Bill Jackson today, who's our head of R&D for our flexibles business, he would tell you that we're also on track to have recyclable options for all of the products that we make today. And ideally, we'll get those into the marketplace and make sure that the consumer packaged goods companies have access to those. Right now, Amcor is spending more than $100 million every year on research and development. We're building research and development centers in different parts of the world so that we have people working in the geographies where you have these sort of unique markets and unique recycling systems to better understand them. And we're making really good momentum because we see this as the best opportunity for Amcor and for our industry to be ahead of this problem.
Thank you. So obviously putting designed for recycling packaging onto the market only makes a positive contribution if consumers are actually able to recycle it. Um, was this dynamic reflected in your consumer research? Any insights that you saw there?
Yeah, it was. There were a few that I think are notable. One is we were trying to dig into the concept that more recyclable packaging, in some cases, may be more expensive. And when we layer that with a producer responsibility system where there's a fee being paid on packaging to support recycling, in many countries, those fees are ultimately passed on to consumers. So you may see it in a slightly higher price. And many of us have seen surveys in the past where, we ask consumers, are you willing to pay more for a more sustainable product or more sustainable packaging? And they all say yes. And then we launch a product and nobody buys it. Or people aren't willing to pay more because there's this disconnect in terms of it's really easy to say yes on a survey when you're thinking about it and you're ticking a box, but when you're in a store shelf with all of these different choices and you're thinking about which one to put in your basket, you're probably not going to make a concerted effort to choose the most sustainable one, or you make a decision based on price. But when we asked people the sort of same question differently in different ways, one of the questions was, if you knew, or if a package was going to be recycled and you were able to recycle it, how much more would you be willing to pay? And the question was sort of based on if the product costs £2, would you be willing to pay 1 to 5 pence, 5 to 10 pence, whatever? And across most countries, the answer came back: consumers would be willing to pay about 5% more for a package if they knew, for a product, if they knew that that package was ultimately going to be recyclable and could be recycled. We also asked a sort of more general question about how do you feel about producer responsibility laws, which may increase the cost of the products you're buying, but they ensure that there is adequate funding for good recycling programs, and ultimately motivate brands to make more recyclable or more sustainable packaging. And what came through there is there was widespread support for those types of programs from consumers. Something like 80% of respondents on the survey all said, yes, this sounds like a good idea. And I think that rings true with what we see in most countries once EPR is implemented, especially if you have a good system that's functioning well and creates a level playing field for different types of packages. Consumers generally like them. So I think that's an important message as we send toward governments and others thinking about, should we implement these? The citizens, the voters in general are very supportive.
Great. And when we think about the recycling infrastructure, the whole system of stakeholders that are outside the actual value chain that play an important role in realizing the circular economy, where do you see the role of Amcor in trying to influence that wider infrastructure?
It's a position where we're right in the middle of the resin companies, and we're trying to help facilitate our supply base to transition from virgin resin to more recycled content, because our customers, the consumer brands on the other side, have all committed to use, or many of them have anyway, committed to use less virgin fossil-based plastic over the next several years. So we'll be transitioning to more recycled content, reducing the amount of virgin resin through lightweighting and down gauging, where it's appropriate, shifting to paper or other substrates where that's appropriate for the products and the brands. And as the people in the middle who are kind of making the packaging and understand better than anyone what are the implications of using different materials, of being able to design packaging differently, how could packaging be designed to lower extended producer responsibility costs? For example, fees are based on how easy is a package to collect and recycle, and what's the value of that package after it's been collected in the market for scrap material. We can help optimize those systems. And I think we can have a much bigger influence on the entire system than we could if we just sat back and designed what we were being asked to design and use the raw materials that were being presented to us. So that's what we're really trying to influence. And I think as we transition from this idea of the linear economy to the circular economy, we will see that across all of our different businesses, whether you're a raw material supplier or a brand or a recycler. in a way, we become our own raw material supplier. We are making the packaging that will be recycled to put back into the recycled content in our packaging again. And, we're very motivated to make sure that we get back the best quality possible.
Thank you. And extending this idea of the network of stakeholders that need to come together. Obviously, everyone knows that multi-stakeholder collaboration is key to driving the circular economy. How do you assess the general state of collaboration at the moment? Do you think that progress is on track? Is it keeping track with the kind of progress that organizations like you are making in design for recycling? Or is it kind of lagging behind the getting all of the other elements of the circular economy lined up as they need to be?
I've been really excited in the last year or two to see how well industry is starting to align. And I think more and more people are sort of coming on board and realizing that this is a good way to go. So, a couple of examples. One is on the design side and design standardization. There's been some work done with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and with CFlex on flexible packaging. More broadly, recently, the Consumer Goods Forum, which is a membership organization with over 400 consumer brands and retailers, issued what they call their golden design rules to improve the recyclability of plastic packaging. Applies both to rigids and flexibles. And the number of companies that are signing on to that is really, I think, reassuring that we're moving the right direction. It's been adopted by the Canadian Plastics Pact. Variations of that are being adopted by pacts in other countries, and they're really aligning everyone on that initiative. Like I said, is if we can design all the packaging to be recyclable and the recyclers know what they're getting, we improve the value of the materials and the economics and quality of recycling. So on that side, it's been going really well. On the collaboration around end of life solutions, I think one of the things that we see is the support that continues to grow for producer responsibility systems. I mean, five years ago, if you spoke with many consumer brands, especially here in the United States, but in other countries as well, they saw it as an additional fee, a headache they didn't want to have to, participate in. And they tended to oppose those types of proposals. Now, many of the large brands are, not only endorsing them, but supporting good ones where they can have operational control. They can help manage, how large are those fees going to be? How is the money spent? How do we ensure that our packaging does get collected and that we can get that material back for recycled content? And they see that as one of the best opportunities to help get that infrastructure and consumer participation in place. And the alignment that we're seeing around the industry, I think, is really exciting.
That's a really positive picture. Are there any areas where you think that we really should be doing better? I mean, not necessarily we as an industry, but certain pressure points within the wider group of stakeholders. If we think of regulators, you've talked about the lack of harmonization in waste management infrastructure, etc.
Yeah, I think that you've touched on it, Tim, and I can give maybe two examples. One is some of you may have seen, or many of you may have seen, a few weeks ago the global commitment sort of status report or update came out, where all of the companies who had signed on have reported their progress over the year. And the global commitment definition of recyclability, for those of you who aren't familiar with this, looks at is a package actually recycled in practice and at scale. So do 400 million people around the world somewhere recycle that package at a rate of over 30%? And there are package formats for sure, flexible packaging, many of them, where 400 million people may not even have access to flexible packaging recycling today, let alone recycle at those types of rates. And the problem that you'll see with that type of reporting or that type of metric is until that happens, all of the work that many of us are doing on switching packaging to be more recyclable won't show up in the progress. So we've got to find other ways to report on what we're doing and show that we are moving to ultimately be able to sort of flip that bit. We hit the 430% and then boom, all of these packages suddenly become recyclable. So the progress is somewhat hidden in some of those reports. And to get that bit to flip in many cases, it's going to rely on governments to come on board. There are some initiatives to move governments, like the proposed UN treaty on plastic pollution. Realistically, it's going to take a few years to get a UN treaty in place. And we hope countries don't wait until there's a treaty to start acting on this, and many of them are not. And in our survey, one of the surprising results was that when we asked consumers, do you feel that governments have a role in providing adequate recycling so that the packages that you buy, have a recycling system available? The vast majority said yes. So there's some growing awareness, I think, that governments do have a role to play, and they tend to be moving a little bit slower than the collaborations and businesses right now. So it's an opportunity for us to sort of help them catch up. Let's get the infrastructure in place, and the more we can mobilize consumers who are also voters to voice their opinions, I think we can accelerate that process.
That's fascinating. I'm also struck by growing discussion of the possibility that a global treaty to kind of harmonize approaches on plastic waste and circular economy could be a valuable thing. I know Ellen MacArthur Foundation is getting behind that idea, and it's something that I think we'd like to explore more in the coming year. Is that something that you would welcome?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'll add that many businesses have already supported the idea of a treaty, and certainly we'd like to see one that's well designed and supports business and circularity. But there's already been a strong business case made for a treaty along the right lines.
Okay, great. Well, I have plenty of other questions, but I can see that we're getting a lot of really fascinating questions coming in from our audience. Some of them are overlapping with some of the things I wanted to ask you anyway. So I feel like this is probably a good time to turn over the agenda to our audience and put some questions to you from them, David. So we might flip around. I'll try to group questions so that they're kind of thematically connected to each other. But let's start with a question that's focusing on R&D. And we have one question here that's asking, what are the biggest R&D challenges that Amcor is still facing around design for recyclability? So I guess we could ask you in terms of particular packaging applications. I'd also be interested in the context of which areas of your portfolio are more challenging. I would imagine that flexibles are probably the most tricky there.
Yeah, flexibles are the most tricky. As I said, most of our portfolio in terms of folding cartons or rigid packaging is already recyclable, and we think we know what to do there. On the flexible packaging side, from a materials and design standpoint, I mean, it's really about how do we replicate the performance properties that we have today with a limited palette of materials that are going to fit into recycling systems in the future. And typically that is going to be materials that are either polyolefins or compatible with polyolefins in the recycling stream. So eliminating metallization in layers, eliminating or minimizing nylon, certainly removing PVC and PVDC, polystyrene, and the materials that recyclers have pretty much said that there isn't a really strong pathway to get those into a recycling system or make them recyclable. And it tends to be the products that have the sort of highest performance. So meats and cheeses is one where it just requires very high performance, high barrier performance, and we have some options that are available there. We launched a new product called EcoTight, which is suitable for that market, but doesn't cover, obviously every application. So those are the types of things that are difficult. And then there are the discussions that are ongoing with recyclers about, okay, even if we get the material palette right, which is, a really important part that we're expert at, how do we fix the issues like, size? Very small packages tend to, fall through sorting screens or become more difficult to sort. So how do we resolve those, and what's the right answer in those cases? And I don't know that we have good answers in all of those yet. So that's something that's we continue to work on. When we look at alternatives to recycling, I mean, we've spent a lot of time on recycling. We talked about how consumers, see that as, sort of the option they gravitate to as well. We're looking a lot at reuse and where does reusable packaging fit in the portfolio of solutions going forward. We do make recyclable beverage packaging today, primarily for Latin America. That business is still small for us, but it's doubled in the last few years. It's growing. So we're wondering where else could that be appropriate, from a consumer standpoint, from an economic standpoint, and from an environmental standpoint. Does it really have benefits over recycling? So we're doing a lot of work to better understand that. And the same with compostability. We do offer compostable, packaging and products into the market, but understanding where does that fit with consumer behavior, where does it fit with actually having composting systems available, is still something that we're working through. And that's another sort of challenge when you look at the performance requirements of packaging. If you're looking at a package with high barrier performance to keep moisture out or keep oxygen out, or to be strong and resist damage in transition in transportation. But then when it goes into a composting system, we want it to degrade in a very rapid, at a very rapid pace. Those are kind of opposite performance characteristics. And how do we find something that meets the needs of the package and the product, but then also fits the end of life scenario, are real, tough R&D challenges.
Thank you very much. You mentioned reuse there. I had a question also from the audience talking about the reuse opportunity for Amcor. Do you see that as primarily an opportunity for the rigids side of the business, or is that something where obviously one of the reuse models is the refill, which obviously is an area where the flexibles can also play an important part?
Yeah, and we do that as well. Certainly the refill in rigids, as I said, for beverages is sort of well known, and many of us have seen refillable water or soft drinks, or we're aware of them in some countries. There are some systems for beer as well. So those are typically systems where the bottle is returned to the manufacturer and refilled and then put into the marketplace again. The same bottle can essentially be used a large number of times. There are other refill scenarios, as you mentioned, a refill at home, where you might have a dispenser for hand soap, but then you buy a large flexible package that can refill the dispenser 5 times, which is very efficient, both from a material standpoint and an economic standpoint for the consumer. It costs less. And we do those as well. So evaluating where could those work, again, from a consumer behavior and convenience standpoint, as well as economics. And there are other models when you start looking at e-commerce, and can we use e-commerce to return packaging either locally or to the manufacturer and refill? And I think there are a lot of opportunities here that are still being explored. We're certainly aware the retailers are becoming more and more engaged in this, because in some ways they have a closer relationship with the consumer. We see shelf space being set up for different refill or reuse, package reuse scenarios. And I'm really eager to see if we can get some transparency and some data about how often are they used, what do they cost, how do we deal with problems like counterfeiting or contamination in some of those systems. I think then we can all learn from that and see what we can do to put reuse to work where it's appropriate.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to stick with questions that are more talking about your R&D and innovation for the moment. Here's a more specific one. So Amcor has added barrier properties to new generation monofilms using Syox coatings. That's silicon oxide, isn't it? Could these coatings reduce the purity of the recyclate that's coming through?
The Syox technology has been used in rigid packaging with PET bottles for years, and the recyclers of PET have all agreed that it doesn't affect the quality of the recycling there. These silicon oxide coatings are just so thin that the amount of material in them is really inconsequential in the recycling system. They provide really good barrier properties in a very, very thin layer that are sort of it's like a plasma deposition almost on the package. So the amount of material that you end up in the recycling stream is not impacting the recycling quality at all. That's one of the things that's exciting about it.
Okay, thank you. We've had a couple of questions asking about chemical recycling. Actually, we had a live panel discussion yesterday on the same platform talking about this topic. So I don't
Yeah.
know if that's particularly topical in the audience's mind at the moment. But does chemical recycling come into your strategies when you're thinking about the kinds of designed for recycling packaging that you're putting onto the market? Or are you fairly agnostic about the approach to recycling that will come about afterwards?
Well, I guess there are two parts to that. From the standpoint of can we collect materials and recycle them and find homes for them? We're somewhat agnostic. Let's let the markets decide what are the best solutions in terms of economics and demand for where the materials can be used. And with PET, we see a big demand for PET bottles in the fiber market, for example, or strapping or other uses. And sometimes having a bit of competition or a bit of resilience in the marketplace, so not everything's only going to one use, can be really important. When we move into flexible packaging, especially in polyolefins, there are a few challenges. One is there aren't good mechanical recycling processes that would allow us to use that recycled content back in food packaging again. They're just different types of polymers, and the technologies don't exist. You're also dealing with packages that have, ink, adhesives, and other things that may need to be, removed to be food safe. So from a food safety standpoint, chemical recycling is probably one of the best opportunities we see to be able to put more recycled content into our flexible packaging and other polyolefin packaging going forward. In terms of design, one of the things that we've seen over the last few years and has been really, I think, gratifying for us is that if you look at the input material requirements for chemical recycling, although in many cases they say they can take a broad range of materials, as you put more polyolefins into the chemical recycling stream, you get better yield and you get better quality of what comes out, and you get less waste that you have to get rid of. So the design criteria that we've developed for mechanical recycling for flexible packaging fits really well in terms of the chemical recycling scenarios that we're looking at, in particular, pyrolysis for recycling polyolefins. So we see that as a sort of win-win, where if we align on these design guidelines for mechanical recycling polyolefins, it will only help the chemical recycling.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, let's move away from the more R&D focused questions. So here's a question. Does Amcor see a shift from the recyclability message to a recycled content or lower carbon footprint message? So when you're talking to consumers, yeah, there are different ways of stressing the sustainability of packs, aren't there? I guess this can relate back to the survey that you've talked about. So you stress that recyclability seemed to be a key factor there, but maybe you could expand a little bit on that.
We found that recyclability and the ability to recycle a package is extremely important to consumers, but I think we're almost to the point where that's going to become table stakes. That's what consumers are going to want. One of the things that we saw in the survey is consumers said they would feel better about recycling or be more motivated to recycle if they actually knew the products that they were putting in the bin got recycled. And we've all seen articles where, the recycling from some country or somewhere was shipped somewhere else and landfilled, or was actually going to incineration and wasn't being recycled. And I think we've lost some trust with consumers around the effectiveness of recycling, and they don't want to be greenwashed. So putting recycled content back into the package and actually demonstrating that, we are using the material that you recycle and putting it back into the package has a really strong, I think, message to consumers, and is really important. And people are starting to realize that. We're seeing, consumers appreciate recycled content more. We're seeing governments in Europe and some states in the United States start to implement recycled content mandates, where you're going to have to use a certain amount of recycled content by a certain day to be able to put products in the market or to avoid taxes. And I think we'll only continue to see that acceleration of circularity in terms of recyclable and then getting it back into the package again. From consumers, we're not seeing as much competitive pressure or pressure around carbon footprint, but I think, if you look more broadly, again, I think it's just becoming table stakes. People are expecting governments and brands and companies and business to be moving toward science-based targets, to be thinking about how do I get on that pathway to net zero, and they're expecting that the products they buy are coming from companies that are doing that.
Thank you. Well, here's a slightly related question. We're still talking about how we communicate to consumers. Can you please address the issue of including high-valued recycled content into flexible packaging, which is, for the most part, still not actually recyclable, or may only be recyclable in store take-back programs, which in the USA are few and far between? Are we further confusing consumers by calling these structures recycle-ready?
That's a good question, and there've been a few product launches, I think, where the brands have done a really good job of explaining to consumers that this is designed to be recyclable. You may not be able to recycle it where you live today, but this is an important first step, because if we don't make everything recyclable, we'll never get a recycling system that is going to be able to take it. So we may be confusing consumers, and we could improve on that. I think the other thing that we run into sometimes is allowing people to sort of make perfect the enemy of the good, or the enemy of progress. And when you look at how a recycling system works, you need to be able to collect material. You need to be able to sort that material into what recyclers call streams. And those different streams become commodity markets. So there are commodity markets for glass, commodity markets for aluminum, paper, and corrugated, and different grades of plastic. PET bottles and HDPE bottles have very strong markets today. There isn't much of a market for post-consumer flexible packaging today. What is collected in many cases goes to plastic lumber. Some of it is going to incineration and energy production or cement kilns today. But until we get to the point where that material has value and we can develop markets where people actually use it, whether it's going into automotive parts or new packaging, we have to be able to build that system. And the fact that some of it that we're collecting and sorting today isn't actually being recycled today shouldn't stop us from driving toward the long-term goal of creating circularity for these. I think we have to be maybe a lot smarter about how we convey that to consumers so it doesn't come across as greenwashing. But there are going to be many steps that are sort of halfway steps or imperfect steps until we get to the point where a full system is in place, because it is so large and complex.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you. So I've had a couple of questions asking about the role that LCAs and specifically carbon footprint play in your strategies and your R&D. I think rather than asking them separately, I'd like to generalize those and ask you, how and whether and how your R&D is led by LCA data.
Yes, it is. Amcor was one of the first packaging companies going back to 2008 that set a greenhouse gas emissions reduction target that included not only scopes 1 and 2, but scopes 3 for all of our raw materials as well. And we've made really good progress. Back then, we set a target of 60% intensity reduction out to 2030, and we're well over halfway there. We're on track to achieve that target. So we're making good progress. We have an internal life cycle assessment tool that we call Asset that is used as we're developing new products, so that our design engineers can say, well, if I use these materials and these gram weights, what's the carbon footprint compared to the package that we're using today? Does it actually offer an improvement? And that's one of the ways that we reduce our carbon footprint, as well as the carbon footprint of our customers who are using those packages. And that that design process happens in most of the packages that we make. I think I'd have to go back and look at the sustainability report. It's in there, but I think we're at over 10,000 assessments that we've done with Asset on different packages. So it's well embedded in our R&D process.
Thank you. And in fact, your reference to the sustainability report reminded me that I wanted to share in the chat a link to the report. So I'm just going to share that right now with everyone. So if you click on that link, audience, that will take you directly to the 2021 sustainability report, and you can delve into some of those numbers in your own time. Thank you, Dave, for that answer. So also related very much to the carbon footprint of the packaged good is the shelf life of food. And we've had an interesting question here on that topic. Do you see that in some products, your customers need to accept a shorter shelf life in order to move to recyclable packaging? And do they accept this? And that's quite a key trade-off that we've seen. For example, looking at the kinds of discussions going on within CFlex, those are some very, very important questions that need to be addressed.
Yeah, it's one where I think you can't make generalizations on that one. We have seen some examples where customers, our customers, who are the consumer brands or retailers, will consider a trade-off of a shorter shelf life. And if they look at how their product turns and how consumers use it, maybe they can do that. Certainly, people want shelf life and protection that is as long and strong as possible. That continues to be our R&D team's focus, is to make these transitions as easy as possible and not require trade-offs on shelf life, or in many cases, although there may be changes that need to be made in filling lines, for example, or in package formats or those types of things, to make those as easy and as simple to transition and go into a new package is something that we see as being incredibly important. So, I guess we see it in some cases with customers in certain products, and others, there's going to be no way that we can compromise on shelf life, and we just have to, come up with the innovations that are going to meet those needs.
Thank you very much. All right, here's another question. This is asking how are sustainability performance and attributes of raw materials that are integrated in the criteria set for raw materials sourcing by Amcor? Sorry, it made sense when I read it the first time. I think the question is asking how you assess raw materials that you're using for Amcor, and the sustainability performance and attributes of those. And I believe I recognize the name of the person who asked the question, and they may well be a supplier to Amcor.
Okay, all right.
So I guess that they're interested in how. Well, please go ahead.
Well, if you're a supplier to Amcor, I urge you to talk to our procurement people and don't tell them that, well, Dave said this, because I might get myself in trouble. But I'd say that I think there are three from a sustainability perspective. What we're looking for is the material responsibly produced and sourced. Does it offer us benefits over the materials we're using now in terms of lower carbon footprint, water, and then can it improve the performance of the packaging that we're making? And one of those definitions now of improving the performance that we're of the packaging is it going to be recyclable, or is there an appropriate end of life reuse or compostability of that package, and how do those all fit together? Each raw material in itself is one component of a package that is often multiple materials. So how do they interact with each other and how do they interface is really important. And one of the things that we're seeing working with groups like the Association of Plastics Recyclers, or CFlex and the recyclers in Europe with Recyclass, is sort of a move from a design spec that says it should be this much material and not more than 5% of this or whatever, to actually actual recyclability testing. Can we take this package as it's designed and proposed, put it into a recycling stream, and make sure that it's recyclable and not detrimental to that system? And more clarity and understanding of what's ultimately going to happen to those materials when they get recycled. Are they going to pass those tests? Are they going to make the recyclers happy and create a valuable material downstream? Are the discussions we'd like to have with suppliers about how we evaluate raw materials.
Thank you. So we've had a couple of questions, one asking about the relationship with brand owners, and another about the relationship with retailers. I'm interested in your views on these, so I'll ask them separately. The first question is, how are brand owners working with Amcor to work with the cost increase and actually bring your sustainable packaging to market?
Well, I'd like to say that they love the cost increases, but obviously, again, I'm not involved in all of the commercial applications. But one of the things that we're looking at is how do we create the best value for each of the packages that we make for our customers? Because the cost scenario now has moved from a discussion of, well, what's the cost of this package per unit, and what kind of delivery can you guarantee, to what's the value of this within the scenario that we're looking at. So you may be faced with EPR fees on the various packages that you buy. So what's the EPR fee associated with the package we're using today, and are there opportunities to lower that fee in different ways? Are there packaging taxes that are being applied to this? Does it fit into a DRS system if it's a rigid package? And if you look at all of those costs combined, the value proposition can be very different than just saying, well, this package costs X% more than the one I was using now, so that's not going to be acceptable. And I think as an industry, we're still thinking through how we structure that and make sure that we're providing the best total value proposition rather than just the best unit cost.
Thank you very much. I can just say that we've still got people joining the meeting when we have about 5 minutes left. And if you missed the start of it, we will be making a recording of this available, so you will be able to catch up with the start of today's discussion. Okay, so I said there's also a question about retailers, and here's the way it was phrased. Retailers always drive change way ahead of legislation. All are making pledges on packaging. Who is going in the right direction? Now, I guess you're not going to name names or shame those who aren't, but maybe you'd like to comment on the kinds of positive action or less positive action in general that you would like to see from retailers.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that you're right. Retailers are at the sort of tip of the spear with consumers. That they in many cases own the relationship with the consumers. They edit the products that are on their shelves, and they have a great opportunity to communicate with consumers about the benefits or the facts about different products that they're buying, including the packaging. When the issues around plastic waste first came out, we did see several of the retailers issue sort of guidelines on the packaging they'd like to see in their stores, and many of those were different, which caused concerns for the brands and companies like Amcor. And I'm again really pleased to say over the last few years we've seen those very much harmonize along the same lines as industry. So now we see some of the large retailers in the US, for example, participating in the US Plastics Pact. The Canadian retailers are taking leadership positions in the Canadian Plastics Pact, and I think we see the same in the UK and other countries. So again, they're sort of joining the opportunity to align and ensure that we create systems that don't confuse consumers, but that will actually scale and meet consumers' needs.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to take one final question, and this is picking up on another topic that you raised in passing in the conversation. So I'm glad to have a chance to expand on it. You mentioned bio-based materials in the plastics area. And the question here is, would Amcor use a renewable PE or PP if it is made from food source like corn or sugarcane? And maybe I could just invite you as well to give us a little bit more general background on your strategy as bioplastics go.
Yeah, well, I think bioplastics are seen as one of the options to decouple the virgin resin supply from fossil fuels, and it's an area that we're looking at. We do make some products today with bio-based PE that is made from sugarcane, which would be a food, a potential food source. We work with groups like Bonsucro to make sure that that supply chain is responsible. I think that's one of the big questions that we still have as an industry. We need to look at is if we were to scale the bioplastic supply to the point where it became a large contributor to reduce decoupling from fossil fuels, what would the impacts be on food supply, on land use, on water use? And is it even possible to use non-food crops in a way that don't displace land from food crops or deplete soil or other things? I don't know that we've resolved those, or if those are really answered well enough to give us confidence, but it's an area we continue to explore.
Fine, thank you very much. Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. we've had a particularly active audience and a lot of questions that I didn't have time to address to David, so apologies to that. What I will do is share David's LinkedIn profile through the chat. I've just done so now. So if you'd like to reach out to him and network and put more questions to him, then please feel free to do so. For now, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for all your questions and engagement. And a special thank you to David Clark for telling us all about the sustainability reports and in your strategy.
Thank you, Tim. Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye, everyone.